They say children laugh for no reason. But I've learned, sometimes there is a reason. And sometimes that reason has nothing to do with joy. It was supposed to be a new beginning, a clean slate, a quiet house at the edge of town where the sidewalks ended and the air smelled of pine and rain. After the divorce, I needed space. Space from noise, space from the city, space from everything I used to know. I needed it for myself. But more importantly, I needed it for Lily, my 6-year-old daughter who hadn't smiled right since her father walked out. The listing called it a cozy fixer-upper with character. What I got was an aging 2-story colonial with creaky floors, wallpaper that peeled like old skin, and a basement that was permanently sealed shut with rusted chains and a deadbolt the size of my fist. The realtor waved it off when I asked. "Oh, that? Just old house quirks. Moisture damage, I think. You'll want to keep that closed anyway." I didn't press. I had bigger things to worry about, like finding work, unpacking boxes, and making sure Lily had enough light in her room to keep the shadows away at night. But it didn't take long, just 3 nights, before the house began to speak. It started with laughter. A soft, breathy giggle that floated through the hallway like mist. It was faint at first. So faint, I thought I imagined it. Maybe Lily was watching cartoons on her tablet again. Maybe it was the wind playing tricks on the loose siding. Maybe it was nothing. But then came the footsteps. Light, delicate, like a child tiptoeing barefoot across old floorboards. I heard them from my bedroom just after midnight. Tiny steps that moved from the living room to the hallway and stopped directly in front of my door. I held my breath. "Lily?" I whispered, unsure if I wanted a response. There was no answer, just silence, and then that same laughter again, this time closer, clearer, more confident. I jumped out of bed and swung the door open. The hallway was empty. I rushed to Lily's room. She was sound asleep, curled into a ball, one hand clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her nightlight glowed beside her bed, casting soft yellow halos on the wall. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I checked the baby monitor I had set up in her room. Nothing but silence. No voices, no movement. No sound but the occasional hum of the heater kicking on. Still, I couldn't shake it. That laughter. It had sounded so real. 2 days later, Lily said something that chilled my blood. We were eating breakfast, frozen waffles and orange juice, when she casually mentioned it. "The girl in the basement told me you'd be scared." I froze. "What?" She took a bite, syrup smeared on her cheek. "She said you don't like her laugh. But I do. She's funny." I set my fork down slowly. "Lily, who told you that?" "The girl." She pointed to the floor. "She talks through the hole." I didn't want to look, but I did. Just behind the pantry door was an old heating vent built into the floor, directly above the basement. My stomach twisted. That afternoon I checked the vent. I unscrewed the grate, shined a flashlight down into the darkness below. All I could see were cobwebs and crumbling stone. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the cold that drifted up from below, it wasn't normal. It felt wrong. Ancient. Watching. That night I left my bedroom door open. At 3:07 a.m., the laughter came again. Only this time, it wasn't faint. It was right there. A girl's voice. Light, high-pitched, playful. She giggled, hummed a tune I didn't recognize, and whispered something I couldn't quite catch. I jumped up and flicked on every light in the house. Nothing. No one. I rushed to Lily's room. She was awake. She looked up at me and smiled. "You heard her too this time." I didn't answer, because I was too busy listening to the voice coming from the vent behind her dresser. It was humming. For the first time since moving in, I truly questioned if I had made a mistake. I spent the entire next morning pacing through the house, checking every vent, every crevice, every possible explanation. The logical part of my brain, the part that believed in drafts and plumbing noises and children's imaginations, was at war with what I had heard. But there was no denying it now. I'd heard her too, the voice from the basement. And worse, Lily wasn't afraid. She spoke of the girl like a friend, like someone who had been with her for days, if not longer. She described her as pale, like the moon, with long black hair that touches the floor. She didn't have a name, Lily said, because she forgot it when she got left behind. Left behind? I tried to keep calm. I didn't want to scare Lily, didn't want to feed into what might have been just an overactive imagination. So I played along, asked her simple questions, gently steering the conversation away when it became too eerie. But what she said next froze me in place. "She says you'll go away soon, too," Lily whispered while coloring. "Who told you that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The girl," she replied without looking up. "She said everyone goes away, but I won't. I'm her favorite." I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I sat in the living room with every light on, a cup of coffee shaking in my hand. I kept staring at the basement door. The chains, the deadbolt, the thick wooden planks. It looked like something out of a horror film, and it raised questions I didn't want to ask. Why was it sealed so thoroughly? Why hadn't I demanded an explanation before signing the lease? At around 2:40 a.m., the house went cold. Not chilly. Cold. The kind that crawled through your clothes, found your bones, and hollowed out your breath. The lights flickered. A sound hummed through the walls. A faint, lilting nursery rhyme tune. And then came the laugh. Right behind me. I turned so fast I nearly spilled my coffee. Nothing was there. But I knew it had been close. Closer than ever. I grabbed my phone and started recording, aiming the mic at the air vent, the walls, even the floor. I needed proof. Something. Anything. When I played it back, at first it was only static. Then came a faint voice, barely above a whisper. "Lily, stay with me." I dropped the phone. The next day, I called the realtor. She didn't answer. I left 3 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. I even drove to the property management office, but the building was locked up, shuttered, empty, like it hadn't been used in months. I looked it up online. The company still had a website, but no contact info, no active listings, no digital trace at all beyond a few cached pages. It was like they had vanished. That night, I noticed something new. Scratches. Dozens of tiny scratch marks across the wooden floor just outside Lily's room. Thin, shallow lines etched into the grain, like fingernails had scraped across it repeatedly. My first instinct was to clean it up, hide it from Lily, but then I saw the shape they made. A circle. Carved over and over deeply in some spots. And in the center, a single word. Stay. I sat on the floor, staring at it, my breath caught in my throat. That's when I heard Lily's voice from behind her door. She was talking, whispering, to someone. I pushed open the door slowly. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the floor, facing the air vent beneath her dresser. Her hair was falling over her face, and she didn't turn around. She was holding her stuffed rabbit, whispering to it, rocking slightly back and forth. "Lily?" I said gently. She paused, then looked over her shoulder at me with a smile. "She says you're going to get in the way." I didn't know what to say. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Lily turned back to the vent. "She doesn't like when you listen." That night, I made a decision. I was going to open the basement. I waited until Lily was asleep, then moved her dresser to the side and blocked the vent with a thick towel. I didn't want her hearing whatever might happen. I didn't want her to hear Lily either. Then I went downstairs, I stood in front of the chain door for a long time. Every instinct screamed at me not to do it, but I had to know, had to see. I removed the chains. They clattered to the floor like dead snakes. I took a deep breath and slid the deadbolt back. The door groaned as it opened, slow and loud, like it hadn't moved in decades. What hit me first was the cold, then the smell, damp wood, earth, mildew, and something else, something older. I flipped the switch on the wall. Nothing. Of course. I aimed my flashlight down the stairs. The beam cut through the dark, revealing rotting steps and a dirt floor below. Webs clung to every corner, dust floated like ash. And in the far back corner, something moved. Not fast, not jerky, just shifted. I raised the flashlight. There, etched into the brick wall, was a child's handprint. Small, barely bigger than Lily's. And beneath it, scrawled in chalk or bone, were 5 words. I never meant to die. The basement door stayed open after that night. I couldn't bring myself to close it. Something about sealing it again felt wrong, like I would be denying what I'd seen, pretending it hadn't happened. But I also couldn't bear the idea of leaving it wide open, exposed like a wound. So I hung a heavy blanket over the frame instead. It hung limp, unmoving, even when the cold draft rose up from below. And the cold was always there now, even during the day. I didn't tell Lily what I found, only that the basement wasn't safe, but she seemed to know already. She stopped talking to the vent after that night, though she never admitted why. Something about her had shifted. She was quieter, less bright. The way her eyes followed shadows in the corners of her room made me feel like we had both seen something we weren't meant to. Still, I had to understand more. The writing on the wall, "I never meant to die," wouldn't leave my mind. It looped endlessly in my thoughts, each word growing louder at night. So I began digging. Old newspaper records, town archives, local rumor boards, anything connected to this house, this street, this neighborhood. At first there was nothing, just records of a simple 2-story home built in the 1920s. Owners came and went. Some stayed only a year, others less than that. A few left no forwarding address. Then I found a thread on a forgotten message board titled, "The Lakewood Basement Girl." It was only a few posts long, mostly dismissed as urban legend. But one post chilled me. My cousin used to live on West Elridge. She said her daughter kept talking to a girl through the vent, said she laughed at night and asked to be let out. They moved out after a year, said she found a cradle under the house, still rocking. The post was dated 2014, same street, same layout. Cradle? I had to know. That night, after putting Lily to bed and making sure every door was locked, I grabbed my flashlight again and returned to the basement. This time I brought gloves, a pry bar, and a heavy-duty lantern. The air felt thicker as I descended the stairs, like the pressure of the earth above was trying to squeeze me out. Cobwebs stretched across every surface like forgotten memories. But I pushed forward, toward the far wall, where the handprint had been. I knelt, examining the dirt beneath it. It looked uneven, looser. I dug. At first it was just dirt, cold, dry, and heavy. But a few inches down, something scraped against the metal edge of my pry bar. I knelt lower, brushed it away with my hand. Wood. Old, splintered, and gray with time. A cradle, just as the post said. Tiny, delicate, still intact, though warped with moisture. The wood creaked under my touch. But what made me drop the flashlight wasn't the cradle, it was what lay inside. A small, mold-stained baby blanket, tattered and nearly fused to the base of the cradle, and beside it, a child's shoe. Too small for Lily, old-fashioned leather cracking along the seams. Suddenly, the lantern dimmed. And then I heard it, a soft creak, like wood shifting. I turned, slowly. The cradle was rocking, back and forth, back and forth. No wind, no vibration, nothing to cause it. I stumbled back, my heart racing. I shone the flashlight behind me, across the brick walls, and there's toward the stairs, and I saw her, just for a second. A girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, pale, hair matted and long, hanging down past her waist. She stood by the base of the stairs, barefoot, dress torn and soaked at the hem like she'd crawled out of a lake. Her eyes were hollow, and she smiled. The flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness, utter, swallowing black. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen. Seconds? Minutes? But when I finally crawled my way up the stairs and burst into the kitchen, I slammed the basement door shut and threw the chains back on. Even if it felt useless, even if I knew, she was already out. After that night, things grew worse. Lily began sleepwalking. I found her standing at the top of the basement stairs 3 nights in a row, eyes wide open but unseeing. Her hands were always reaching forward, fingers slightly curled like she was trying to hold someone's hand. And she was always whispering one name, Emmy. I never told her the girl's name, never mentioned what I saw. But now, Lily spoke it like they had always known each other, like Emmy had never really left. I didn't know what to do. Every noise in the house made me jump. The heater clicking, floorboards settling, water pipes, everything sounded like laughter, like faint singing, like footsteps coming up from the dark. I started sleeping with the lights on. I stopped leaving Lily alone, even for a minute. But the worst moment came one morning, just before sunrise, when I walked into Lily's room and found her dresser pushed aside again. The vent was uncovered, and drawn in crayon across the entire wall were childlike drawings, stick figures, a small house, a cradle, and beneath it all, in Lily's handwriting, "She lives here now." I didn't sleep for more than an hour the night I found Lily's drawings. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that name, "She lives here now." And I kept hearing the laughter, not loud, not constant, just there. Always faint, always below. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, a small shadow darting around corners behind doors. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my own paranoia feeding on itself. But Lily, she was changing. She started drawing Emmy more often, and not in the way little kids draw pretend friends. These were detailed, precise. She drew Emmy's dress, her hair, the way her hands always seemed to dangle by her sides. She even drew her eyes, 2 empty ovals shaded in deep black. Sometimes Lily talked like Emmy was sitting right beside her. "She wants me to see something," she'd whisper. "What does she want you to see?" I asked once. Lily looked at me and said softly, "Where she went when her mom stopped looking." That's when I knew I had to go deeper. I returned to the archive database. I widened my search this time, not just for our address, but for missing children in the county. I sorted through hundreds of names, years of faces. Some stories ended in resolution. Most did not. Then I saw it. Emily Grace Coulter, born 1946, disappeared 1952, age 6, last seen playing in her backyard on West Elridge Avenue. Our street. The case went cold. Police speculated she wandered off, maybe toward the lake at the end of the neighborhood. Search dogs lost her scent halfway down the street. Her parents were cleared of suspicion, but neighbors whispered about the mother, how she had started seeing things in the weeks before Emily vanished. And then she disappeared too. One day, she simply walked out of her house and never returned. The father stayed for 2 more months, then sold the home and left the state. The home sat empty for a decade. Then, someone built over it. That someone was the first owner of our house. It wasn't just bad history. We were living on it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just creaks and drafts. This was something buried deep, something that had waited decades for someone to hear it, to remember her. And Lily, somehow, was listening. I brought the file to a local historian, an old man who had lived here his entire life. He glanced through the yellowed pages and shook his head slowly. "There's a story about that girl," he said. "My mother told it to me. Said she used to skate around the neighborhood. Always wore this little blue ribbon in her hair. Sweet thing." He paused. "But after she went missing, folks said they heard her laughter at night, echoing out of the basements. Kids in the neighborhood said they'd talk to her through the vents." I felt my chest tighten. "What happened to her?" I asked. He looked at me, his face suddenly grave. "Nothing happened to her. That's the problem. No one ever found her. She just stopped being seen. And the house she lived in? It burned down 5 years later." Burned. Suddenly, that image from the basement wall came back to me. The black soot behind the cradle, the scorched brick near the floor. The child hadn't vanished. She had been buried. I returned home and didn't say a word to Lily. I didn't want her knowing how afraid I was. But that night, when I tucked her in, she reached up and touched my face. "She's sad," she said. "Who is?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Emmy. She says no one ever came looking." "Not really." Then Lily's voice dropped, her fingers curling into my hand. "She thinks you're the first." That night I went back to the basement. I brought the lantern again. And salt. I didn't know what I was doing, not really, but something about salt, it always came up in stories. A line of protection. I traced it around the cradle, then I whispered her name. Once. "Emily?" The air shifted, and then she appeared. Slowly, like fog rising from the earth. Pale skin, long hair, that same threadbare dress. But this time, she wasn't smiling. She looked tired, hurt. Her lips parted, and I heard it again. The words I'd read on the wall. "I never meant to die." I took a step closer, my voice barely worked. "What happened to you?" Her eyes flicked toward the far wall, the one still stained with smoke and age. And that's when I understood. She had been locked down here, trapped, forgotten. Maybe the fire wasn't an accident. Maybe she had been hidden away, abused, silenced, lost. And her laughter? It wasn't play. It was a cry. A cry for someone to finally hear her. I stood frozen in the basement, face to face with what I could only call her. The air had turned sharp, like cold water in the lungs. Emily's ghost hovered just above the cradle, her form flickering softly, like a candle trying not to die out. But she didn't move toward me. She didn't scream or moan or lash out like in the movies. She just stood there, watching me, a child who had waited 70 years to be seen. Her voice finally broke the silence. "Will you help me?" My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, but all I could manage was a nod. That was enough. She drifted backwards, slowly, toward the back wall, the one with the soot stains and the iron pipe protruding near the base. The moment she touched it, something happened. A clink, then a crack, and part of the brick crumbled inward, revealing a small, charred hollow behind it. The smell was instant, dry, rotten, forgotten. Inside, hidden behind scorched stone and dust, was the blue ribbon. Frayed, melted at the edge, but unmistakable. I reached inside. My hands shook. I pulled it free. And as soon as I did, Emily began to fade. Her lips moved again, silently this time, but I could read the words. "Thank you." She was gone. Back upstairs, Lily was already awake, standing at the top of the stairs, her face pale but calm, almost like she knew. "She left, didn't she?" Lily asked. I knelt beside her. "Yes, she did. She said goodbye." I held her tightly, and for the first time in weeks the house felt still. Not silent, not dead, just still. The next day I went to the Historical Society. I donated the ribbon, told them what I'd found. Not everything, just enough. They called the state. Specialists came. Carefully removed parts of the back wall, and behind it, they found more. Fragments of bone, tiny, crushed. DNA testing confirmed it. The remains belonged to a young girl between 5 and 7 years old. They matched the mitochondrial DNA with a surviving relative in Georgia. Emily Coulter had finally been found. After 73 years, she could rest. The local paper ran the story under the headline, "Long Missing Girl's Remains Found Beneath Suburban Home." They didn't mention the laughter. They didn't mention the drawings. They certainly didn't mention the way the cradle had vanished the night after Emily disappeared. Just gone, like it had never been there. Lily stopped drawing after that. She didn't say goodbye to Emmy. She said goodbye to the basement. We sealed it the next week. She hasn't gone near it since. But here's the thing about stories like this. They never really end. Last week, Lily came into the kitchen holding something behind her back. She looked serious, nervous. Then, wordlessly, she handed me a piece of paper. It was a drawing. Not like her usual ones. This one showed our house, but older. Cracked shutters, ivy climbing up the sides, and inside, a source. On the lowest level was a figure. Not Emily. Me. I was standing by the wall, holding a ribbon, and over my head, scrawled in Lily's blocky handwriting, "You weren't the first to try. That night I dreamed of footsteps, of tiny hands clawing at brick, of fire licking at the baseboards, of silence that wasn't empty, but listening. And somewhere, deep in that silence, the faintest echo of laughter." A week passed, then another, and for the first time since moving in, our home was quiet. No laughter, no creaking floors, no invisible footsteps pacing the basement in the dead of night. I convinced myself it was over, that Emily's spirit had finally found peace now that her story had been brought into the light. But deep down, I knew better, because some things don't rest just because you want them to. It was a Thursday night, clear skies, unusually cold for early fall. I stayed up late, scrolling through old newspaper archives online. Something had been bothering me. The headline had never sat right with me. "Little girl vanishes in house fire. Body never recovered." If they never recovered her body, then how did they know it was a fire that killed her? I zoomed in on the grainy scan of the article. The report claimed that the blaze had started in the kitchen, spread to the lower floors, and by the time neighbors called for help, it was too late. Only a partial structure remained. But something didn't fit. There were no accounts of anyone actually seeing Emily that day. In fact, the last person to see her alive was her father. And his statement had been brief. Too brief. I dug deeper, found an old letter from a neighbor, never published. It said, the father, Harold Coulter, was a quiet man. Too quiet. The day Emily disappeared, he had fresh burns on his arms. He claimed he tried to save her, but something in his eyes told me the opposite. I never believed it was just the fire that took that girl. My stomach turned. Emily didn't die in the fire. She was already gone, before the flames ever started. The basement hadn't been her hiding place. It was her tomb. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the hallway sounded like a whisper. Every shadow on the wall seemed to lean in too close. I turned on the hallway light outside Lily's room, checked her door 3 times, then sat in the living room with a cup of cold coffee and a growing weight in my chest. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I heard it again. That same soft, lilting sound. A giggle. High-pitched. Innocent. Cruel. It came from the basement door, but we had sealed it, bolted it, welded it shut. I stood slowly, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. The doorknob was still wrapped in cold steel, still locked, but something was behind it. Not scratching, not banging, breathing. I could hear it, just beyond the wood, waiting. The next day, Lily didn't speak. She just sat at the kitchen table, drawing. When I leaned over her shoulder, my blood ran cold. She'd drawn the basement door again, but this time it wasn't closed. It was wide open, and standing in front of it was me. But not quite me. This version of me had no eyes, just black hollows where they should have been, and a mouth stretched far too wide. Above it, in Lily's careful handwriting, "You let her out." I took Lily to my sister's house that evening, told her it was just for the weekend. But I knew better. I wasn't going to risk it again. Not after what I'd seen in that drawing. Not after the whisper I'd heard the night before, just as I turned away from the basement door. A whisper that said, "He burned me." I returned home alone. The house felt heavier than ever before. Each step was like wading through wet ash. Each breath carried the scent of old smoke and secrets. I went back down to the basement, or what was left of it. The wall was still sealed. The officials had patched the hole and reinforced it. But the air back there was freezing, still, dense. And then I noticed something else. The soot stains on the wall were shifting. Subtle, faint, but unmistakable. They were forming a shape, a handprint. Tiny. Too small to be mine. Too small to belong to anyone living. I backed away. Slowly. Carefully. But I didn't leave. I sat on the floor, right there in the cold, staring at the handprint until the sun came up. It never faded. When morning came, I called the Historical Society again. Asked them if any other children had gone missing in the house. At first they said no, but then a week later I got a letter in the mail. It was from a retired archivist. It read, "In 1928, another fire broke out in the same home. A little boy named Samuel was reported missing. No body was ever found. His mother insisted she could still hear his laughter in the basement. The case was closed. The house was sold. The cycle repeated. There was more. We believed the house is cursed, not by the children, but by whoever first took them." I sat with that letter for a long time, staring at the name of the boy, the year, the pattern. And then I heard it again. A new voice, not Emily's, a boy's, from the basement. Just 3 words. "You see now?" I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. For days I kept hearing them. Not one, but 2 voices now. Both belonged to children. Both came from the same place. The basement. One was unmistakably Emily. The other, a boy, must have been Samuel, the missing child from 1928. His voice was slightly deeper, a little more curious than playful, but it carried the same echo, the same chill. They didn't laugh anymore. They whispered, and they whispered my name. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. Every creak of the floor sent my heart into a panic. I taped blankets over every mirror in the house, somehow convinced their eyes might appear again. I placed salt lines along the baseboards, lit candles at every corner of the basement stairs, read prayers I barely remembered from childhood. Nothing worked. The house was no longer haunted. It was inhabited. And it wasn't just ghosts anymore. It was something else. Something that had taken them. I tried to get help. I called a local priest. He never showed up. I emailed the Historical Society again. No answer. When I searched online for anyone else who had lived in this house, I found only broken links and 2 addresses that no longer existed, like someone had gone back and erased them. Then I checked my voicemail one evening and found a single new message. A voice, faint, female, elderly. They want someone new. It always begins with a name. That was it. No number, no return call, just that warning. That night I dreamed of the basement. In the dream, I was standing at the bottom of the stairs. The walls were dripping. The lights overhead flickered like weak candle flames. Something soft crunched beneath my feet. I looked down. Dolls, hundreds of them. Broken, burned, face down on the floor. I tried to turn, to run, but something was behind me. Breathing. Not fast, not angry, steady, calm, watching. I turned, but there was only a door. Not the basement wall, a door I'd never seen before. Black, wood-scorched, handle rusted red. Something on the other side whispered, "It's your turn now." I woke up screaming. Sweat poured down my face. The room was pitch dark, but not silent. In the hallway, just outside my bedroom, I heard it. Step, 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 tiny, barefoot, deliberate. Then, the sound of the basement door creaking open, even though it was still welded shut. A giggle. But this time, not Emily's, not Samuel's. A third one. A new voice. I ran down the hall and checked every door. All were closed, except Lily's. Empty. My heart dropped. I screamed her name over and over. Nothing. Then I heard her, from downstairs, from the basement. She was laughing, not in fear, not in pain. Playing, like she was with friends. I grabbed a crowbar from the shed and ran straight to the sealed door. Metal screamed as I tore at the bolts, panic drowning out reason. The last plate ripped free. The door opened, and I saw her. Sitting on the stairs, Lily turned toward me and smiled. "I met them, Daddy," she said softly. "They said you let them out. So they let me in." The air behind her shimmered. Figures emerged. Emily, Samuel, another little girl I didn't recognize, a boy with a sunken face and a rope-burned neck, a child in a soot-blackened nightgown. Dozens. They stared at me, silently, eyes hollow, mouths sewn with shadows. Then they all spoke at once, not in voices, but in thought. It always begins with a name. Lily's eyes rolled back. She began to cry. But her tears weren't water. They were ash. I lunged forward, grabbed her, and ran through the cold, through the pressure, through the shrieking noise of children who hadn't had the chance to grow up. I slammed the basement door shut behind us and locked it, though I knew it was pointless. They were out. And they were many. And they had my daughter's name now. That night Lily slept without a sound. But I stayed awake, listening. Not for footsteps, not for laughter, but for that whisper. The one that comes just before it begins again. Because I know it always comes. I started keeping a journal after that night, not because I needed to make sense of things, but because I knew, deep down, I wouldn't remember it all. Not the right way, not the human way. Every morning since Lily came back from the basement, she's been different. Not sick, not possessed, just distant. Like part of her didn't return. She still calls me Daddy, still hugs me, still eats cereal and watches cartoons and leaves her shoes in the hallway, but she doesn't blink as much. She doesn't hum when she brushes her teeth, and she doesn't ask about her mom anymore. I tried talking to her, tried asking what happened down there. She would only ever say the same thing. They said it's better in the dark. When I asked her who they were, she didn't hesitate. The ones with no faces, the ones who don't remember their names. That's when I realized these children, these things, they weren't ghosts, not in the way we understand ghosts. They were fragments, pieces of what used to be children, scattered across time and memory. Some of them were probably real. Others? Maybe echoes. Maybe things that pretended to be echoes. But all of them were trapped in that basement. And now they weren't. The first real sign something had changed came on a Monday. Lily was at school. I was home alone, sitting in the kitchen when I heard the front door open. Not creak, not click. Open. Slam shut. I thought maybe Lily had come back early, but when I stepped out, no one was there. No footsteps. No voice, just a single toy. A spinning top. Old. Wooden. With burn marks. I don't remember ever buying it, but I recognized it. I'd seen it in a photo from the newspaper article about Samuel, from 1928. It was in his hand, in the last photo ever taken of him. That night, I burned it, tossed it into the fire pit out back, and stayed up until it was nothing but ash. The next morning it was back on the kitchen counter, spinning, perfectly balanced. No one touched it, not even the air. I called in sick from work, and I started digging. I pulled out the old files again. Samuel's case, Emily's records, the note from that elderly voice on the voicemail. It always begins with a name. It wasn't just advice, it was a pattern. Every child that vanished here had spoken to someone first, someone new, someone unseen, sometimes in mirrors, sometimes in dreams, and sometimes in laughter. I began to believe the children weren't just trapped souls, but bait, used by something older, something darker, to lure the living. And it didn't want to hurt them, not right away. It wanted them to join it, to forget their names, because when a child forgets their name, they don't cry out anymore. They laugh. And when they laugh in the dark, the thing in the basement gets stronger. I boarded up the basement again, this time with concrete, steel, salt, prayers, etched in languages I don't understand. It didn't matter. The children didn't need the door anymore. They were in the walls, the attic, the plumbing, the reflection of the television screen at night when it's off, but somehow still glowing. They had names once. I kept trying to remember them all. Samuel, Emily, Harriet, Noah, Ava. But the more I tried, the harder it became. It was like they were pulling me into it, unmaking memory, unthreading time. And Lily, she stopped answering to her name altogether. She would only respond when I called her little one or sweetheart. If I said Lily, she'd go quiet, sometimes for hours. Like the name itself hurt, like it reminded her of something she'd been told to forget. I took her to a therapist, a child psychologist. The woman listened patiently, observed. Then she asked Lily to draw a picture of her friends. Lily smiled and drew 7 children, no eyes, no mouths, and one tall shadowed figure standing behind them. The therapist excused herself, said she'd be right back. She never returned. The office was locked from the outside. Lily kept coloring, smiling. That night, I dreamed again. But this time it wasn't the basement. It was a hallway, endless, stretching on for miles. Children stood along both sides, silent, still. Their shadows stretched toward me, and at the end of the hall, a mirror, cracked, bleeding. I stepped forward, drawn to it even as everything in me screamed to turn back. In the mirror, I saw myself. Not as I am, but older. Gray, hollow-eyed, mouth twitching with a smile I didn't recognize. Behind me in the reflection, Lily stood. But her face wasn't hers. It was blank, smooth as porcelain. And then I heard it again, that same whisper. It always begins with a name. I woke up screaming, but not alone. Lily was standing at the foot of the bed, watching, smiling. In her hand was a new drawing. This one showed me, alone, in the basement. And above me, words written in a child's scrawl. He forgot his name, too. There's a moment, just before dawn, when the world feels thin. Like if you listened closely enough, you could hear the fabric of reality breathing, stretching, tearing, trying to hold its shape against something pressing from the other side. That's when I started hearing them. Not just the laughter, not just the footsteps or the voices calling from the basement, but whispers, soft, persistent, like wind through rotting leaves, coming from inside my own mind. They didn't speak in full sentences anymore, just fragments. Come down. Join them. Forget. Sometimes I'd be in the kitchen making Lily's lunch and suddenly forget what I was doing. Or I'd walk into a room and lose 5 minutes, standing there, blinking, holding nothing, hearing nothing except a single childish giggle echoing from nowhere. Worse than that, Lily had stopped sleeping altogether. She sat awake every night in the hallway, facing the basement door, eyes wide, pupils dilated, skin pale like frost. And every so often, she would whisper something under her breath. Once, I leaned in to listen. What I heard chilled me to my bones. If I remember my name, they'll take me back. And just like that, everything made sense. The laughter in the basement, the voices, the dreams. It wasn't just them trying to escape. It was them trying to erase the ones who still remembered. Because memory is power. Names, faces, stories, these are the anchors of the living. Take those away, and we become no different than the children beneath the floorboards. I tried everything. I took Lily to churches, temples, healers. I tried burning sage, holy water, salt lines. I even reached out to a paranormal researcher who had written a forgotten blog about the Bemidji disappearances from the 1920s. His reply came in the form of a single sentence. You're not dealing with ghosts. You're dealing with a place that remembers pain. It all came back to that basement. I knew I had to go back down, one last time. But this time, I wasn't going as a father. I was going as a witness. Someone who would name every lost child out loud. Someone who would remember. Because if no one did, then they would never be free. I waited until midnight. The house groaned with that strange, breath-like rhythm. Lily sat in her spot in the hallway, eyes fixed on the basement door like a cat watching its prey. I kissed her forehead. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Don't say your name down there." I nodded and opened the door. The staircase was colder than I remembered. Colder than winter. The air was thick, not with dust, but with weight. A kind of emotional pressure that made each step feel like I was walking into grief itself. The flashlight flickered as I reached the bottom. The floor creaked under my feet. And then, silence. Not the absence of sound, but a smothering, unnatural silence. Like the house was holding its breath, and then the whispers returned. He's here. He brought a name. Feed the floor. I stood in the center of the basement, heart pounding, breath fogging. I opened my journal, the one I'd used to write down every child's name I could find from the town's records, and I began to speak. Samuel Whitaker, Emily Ross, Noah Thomas, Ava Bell. Each name echoed through the basement like thunder in a tomb. The whispers grew frantic, angry, desperate. The walls began to tremble. Faint shapes emerged in the corners, small figures, thin, translucent, watching. Some were crying, some were laughing, but all of them were listening. I shouted the final name, a new one I had found buried in a death certificate from 1911. Nathaniel Crane! The room seemed to sigh. The shadows pulsed. And then, Lily's voice, coming from the top of the stairs. Daddy? I turned around slowly. She wasn't supposed to be down here, but she stood there barefoot, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. They said, "You forgot your name." My heart dropped, because in that moment, I did. For the briefest second, I couldn't remember who I was. Not my name, not my daughter, not my life. Just a void, a nothing. And in that nothing, I felt hands, cold, childlike hands, reaching for me, trying to pull, trying to claim me. But Lily ran to me, wrapped her arms around my legs, and whispered something into my chest. "You're my daddy. I remember you." And that single memory, that name, Daddy, was enough. The shadows recoiled, the cold receded, the hands vanished. And the laughter? It turned to screaming, not of anger, of grief, of something ancient losing the last child it almost claimed. I carried Lily back up the stairs. We didn't look back. Not once. We sealed the basement again. But this time, not with concrete, with memory. I painted every child's name on the door. I read them aloud every morning. Lily does too. She smiles again now. She hums while brushing her teeth. She calls me Daddy, even when I'm not in the room. And most importantly, she remembers who she is. It's been exactly 1 year. 1 year since I carried Lily out of the basement. 1 year since I said the last name out loud. 1 year since the laughter stopped, but the memory of it, it's still here. Not haunting us like it did before. Not tormenting us with giggles at midnight or shadowy silhouettes peeking from under the stairs. No. Now it lingers like an old photograph. Faded, but not forgotten. And that's the way it should be. Lily's drawings have changed. No more faceless children. No more basements, staircases, or crooked doorways. Now she draws houses with windows full of light, trees with roots, people with names. She taped one of her drawings to the basement door last week. A picture of a small boy holding hands with a girl under a sky full of stars. Beneath it, in blocky, careful letters, she wrote, "You're not forgotten." I never unsealed the basement. I never needed to. What lives down there now isn't evil, it isn't a curse. It's remembrance, a sacred silence. Every night before bed, Lily and I read from the name list. We added more, ones we missed before. We light a single candle and speak each name out loud. Sometimes we cry. Sometimes we sit in silence. But we never skip a night. Because forgetting is how it all began. I still get calls from other parents, other families, people who say they've heard laughter in their walls, or seen toys move on their own, or found drawings their kids swear they didn't make. I listen to every story. I tell them what I've learned. Don't ignore it. Don't bury it. Don't seal it behind concrete or denial. Remember, ask questions, say the names, trace the family trees, open the records no one wants to look at, because places like this exist. And they remember. And all they want is for someone to remember too. There's one more thing I never told anyone. Not even Lily. Not until now. Sometimes on very cold nights when the snow falls just right and the house creaks the way it used to, I go downstairs, just to the door, just to stand there. And sometimes I hear it. Not laughter, not whispers, but something softer. A lullaby, sung by voices too old to be young and too young to be dead. And I think, maybe, just maybe, they're still down there. But they're not lost anymore. They're resting. Because someone finally remembered them. Because someone finally called them by name. The truth is, this story doesn't have a dramatic ending. No final confrontation. No twist where it turns out Lily was never real, or I was the ghost all along. Just a quiet house, a father, a daughter, and a door that stays closed, not because we fear what's behind it, but because we respect it. If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Not for me, not for Lily, but for them. The ones whose laughter once echoed beneath our floorboards. Please, say a name tonight. Any name. A name you haven't said in years. A name from a gravestone. A name from a dusty photograph in your grandmother's attic. Say it out loud. Say it like it matters. Because it does. Because every name you speak is a child taken one step further out of the dark.